Hello everyone, welcome to my PhD defense, and thank you all for coming. I am very happy to be here today and to be able to present a little bit of what I have been doing in the past 4 years. The title of my presentation is Linking Biodiversity, Ecosystem Services and Social Actors for Promoting Agroecological Transitions. So I developed my work in 2 different universities, Wageningen University and also Federal University of Viçosa in Brazil. And in Wageningen, I am part of 2 different chair groups, the Forest Ecology and Management and Farming Systems Ecology. And in Brazil, I am part of the Soil Science Department. So I would like to start my presentation stating that our planet urgently needs sustainable solutions for agriculture. And recent studies, they show that we have already trespassed some planetary boundaries in which the Earth can safely operate. For instance, in terms of genetic diversity and biogeochemical flows of nitrogen and phosphorus, the threshold is already trespassed. So that means that we are endangering human well-being. In order to try to have a more integrative and holistic perspective on farming systems for the development of more sustainable systems, the ecosystem services approach was consolidated in 2005, and it was a very important milestone because it makes explicit the role of biodiversity for human well-being through the provision of multiple functions. We have many different ecosystem services, and they can be classified in 4 main categories: provisioning services, such as food, wood, and fiber; regulating services, such as air and water regulation; supporting services, as nutrient cycling and soil formation; and also cultural services, as aesthetics and recreation. So the key for the provision of ecosystem services is biodiversity, and that means that we need to diversify farming systems in order to make them more sustainable. So for instance, if we introduce trees in agricultural fields, these trees can perform many different functions. They can attract insects that can act as natural enemies of pests and diseases, and also the leaves from the trees, they can fall on the soil and increase soil cover and nutrient cycling. So just to give you an example. And the question that I want to highlight here today is how to make the ecosystem services approach operational, because the theoretical framework has been developed during the past years, and different terminologies also came out, for instance, nature benefits or nature gifts. But I think the biggest challenge for us is how to make this approach operational, how to create strategies to implement agricultural systems that are capable to provide multiple ecosystem services. And to answer in that question, I bring agroecology as a promising approach because it provides the principles for designing biodiversity-based systems. So agroecology can be considered as a practice, a science, and a movement, and it's also a nature-based approach. So it means that we try to optimize the ecological processes and move away from the dependence of external inputs. Agroecology aims not only at the economic, but also social, environmental, and cultural sustainability of the systems. So my work was developing the Zona da Mata region, which can be considered as a mosaic of land uses, mainly predominated by coffee, pastures, and secondary forests. In Zona da Mata, the landscape is very hilly, so it's difficult to mechanize agriculture, and therefore we have the predominance of family farmers. In Zona da Mata, there was a long-term process of agroecological transition that started more than 30 years ago. And in this process, farmers organized in unions and associations, they got together with the university and also a local NGO to try to find solutions for the current problems they were facing in agriculture, such as soil depletion and dependency on external inputs. My research objective is to assess the relationship between farmers' perceptions, biodiversity, and ecosystem services to inform the transition to more sustainable agroecosystems. So here I will briefly explain my research framework in which I used different social and also ecological methods to assess agroecosystems. So I start asking, who are the actors who manage the land? What kind of different strategies do they adopt, depending on their social, cultural, technological, and political contexts? So based on that, I identify different farm types, and I also assess the implications of farm diversity for promoting agroecological transitions. In the second objective, I try to understand and contrast farmers' perceptions on ecosystem services and the consequences for management strategies. In my third objective, I go to a more in-depth analysis of the agroecosystems, especially coffee and pastures, to assess the direct and the indirect effects of management on biodiversity and ecosystem services. And finally, in my last objective, I assess the relationship between biodiversity, ecosystem services, between biodiversity and ecosystem services during secondary forest succession. Yes. So in the first objective, I developed the farm typology combining data from participatory workshops with farmers and also a quantitative characterization of 115 farming systems in Zona da Mata. I identified the 6 main different farm types, but what I want to highlight here today is that these farm types, they can be understood as reference points along a transition continuum. And this transition, it can go from more simplified systems based on monoculture and single crops, such as you can see in the upper 2 pictures. And on the other side of the transition, we have more diversified systems where trees and other plant species are combined with the crops. In this objective, I found that agroecological farms, they were not only more diversified, and agroecological farmers also adopted more sustainable practices, but agroecological farmers, they also had greater access to public policies and extension services, showing that agroecology also goes beyond only the adoption of ecological practices. In my second objective, I assessed farmers' perceptions in a participatory way using fuzzy cognitive maps. So the fuzzy cognitive maps, they consist of factors and causal relationships among these factors. So as you can see here in this picture, the green circles, they are the main direct ecosystem services pointed out by a group of farmers. And we can see how the different factors can influence negatively or positively the provision of ecosystem services. So the main message here is that in general, the perception of farmers from different farm types on ecosystem services is highly complex and interconnected, but agroecological farmers, they had an even more complex perception on ecosystem services, and that was associated with more diversified and autonomous systems, showing that changes in their mind is hand in hand with changes in management. In Objective 3, I went to this more in-depth assessment of management, biodiversity, and soil quality in coffee and pastures. And I did that by measuring many different indicators. So I did many soil analysis and plant diversity assessments, and also I quantified other management practices. And I tried to relate these 3 components using more general indices. So the result that I want to bring here today is that the influence of agroecological management on soil biological quality was mediated by biodiversity. And although in agroecological farms, the farmers, they did not use so many chemical inputs and also pesticides, that did not affect their productivity or their soil chemical quality, showing that biodiversity can play a role to enhance functions such as productivity and chemical fertility. In my last objective, I assessed how soil functions and biodiversity recover during secondary succession. And this is important because if you have a farm, you can try to enhance the sustainability of the agricultural fields, but you also have the farm as a whole, or the landscape as a whole. And in this landscape or in this farm, we also need forest areas, because some ecosystem services, they are only provided by forests. So we also need to think on how to increase forest area on farms. And what I have found here is that soil functions related to carbon and nutrient cycling, they recovered quite fast. In the first 20 years of succession, they reached the levels found in primary forests. So that's good news, that the soil can recover relatively quickly. In terms of biodiversity, the recovery was a bit slower, so it took around 40 to 50 years for secondary forests to reach levels found in primary forests. So I want to finalize my speech saying that agroecology is much more than just input substitution. It requires a systems approach to deal with the complexity of agroecosystems. The focus should be on biodiversity-based processes for the functioning of the agroecosystems. As I showed before, biodiversity plays a major role for maintaining the functions of the system. Besides, we need to go beyond ecological practices and strengthen social organizations, networks, to provide farmers better access to policies, knowledge, and land, which was also reflected in my previous results. And finally, we need a transdisciplinary approach in research with the participation of multiple social actors. So that is very important, because the agrarian reality is just much more really complex and cannot be understood from the lens of a single discipline. So we need to try to combine disciplines and combine different fields of knowledge. And it's also very important to try to explore and understand local people perceptions and knowledge and needs as well, to try to create strategies that can be effective and useful on the ground. So I would like to thank very much all the colleagues that participated and contributed to this work, the colleagues from Brazil and also from Mexico and from the Netherlands. I thank you all very much. It was a very nice and pleasant journey in the PhD, tough but nice. And I would like also to thank the protagonists of this work, which are the farmers that I have been working with. So I worked with many different farmers, and I tried to represent a little bit them here. And it was amazing. I learned a lot with them, and I also think that we had a nice exchange, and they also learned with our research and in the search for more sustainable systems. And finally, at last, I would like to thank the CTA. It's a local NGO that is present in Zona da Mata for more than 30 years, and they have been our partners during this work. So thank you very much.
Please be seated. I hereby open this ceremony convened by the academic boards of Universidade Federal de Viçosa and Wageningen University, in which Heitor Mancini Teixeira is offered the opportunity of defending a thesis with propositions resulting from a joint PhD program entitled Linking Biodiversity, Ecosystem Services and Social Actors to Promote Agroecological Transitions. The defense will take place before an examining committee appointed by the academic board as a prerequisite for conferring the degree of doctor. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you all to this graduation. My name is Tini van Boekel. I'm Emeritus Professor Product Design and Quality Management and representing the academic board of Wageningen University and Director Magnificus today. I now call upon the first examiner, Professor Ante, who is Professor of Crop and Weed Ecology at Wageningen University. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Rector. Dear respected candidate, I very much enjoyed reading your thesis. It's an elaborate piece of work, beautiful cover, very artistic, and a true joy, and learned a lot. But I'm not here to compliment you. I'm also to ask you a few questions. And I'm going to make it very, very simple, because that was what I'm asked to do as a first opponent. And I'm going to give you a multiple choice question. And it is, what is ecology? Is ecology a lifestyle, a political movement, or a science?
Well, I think to answer this question, I would need a fourth option, which would be all the above, because I think ecology, it's for sure a science, but I think it can also be considered as a movement, and can also be considered as a lifestyle. So I think it's the combination of this, and it depends on what perspective do you take, how you will define it.
Okay, so in your book, you rather emphasize A and B, the lifestyle political movement part of it. You used Gliessman, 2008, that more or less defines it as such. I don't see other definitions of agroecology, which essentially is just ecology in an agricultural setting. To me, ecology is nothing more than the study of organisms in relation to their environment, and so agro, which is abbreviation of agricultural, is the study of organisms in the agricultural environment, and nothing more than that. How would you think about that?
Yeah. So, highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. And yeah, I think for me, agroecology, it's a broad term, so it incorporates not only the ecological side of farming systems, but also the social side. And I think agroecology is a counter-hegemonic movement as well, and a counter-hegemonic science, I would say, as well. So for trying to make this counter part strong, it needs also the strength and the role of social movements to try to develop such practices and incorporate them. So I think, yeah, it's a combination of these two.
But ology, I think, is Greek for the study of. So agroecology can, to me, only be the study of something. It cannot be a movement. And by linking the study of a scientific discipline to a movement, you might be giving the movement scientific credit, but you might be weakening the science. Or do you disagree?
Well, I think at a certain degree I agree, but I think agroecology is, as mentioned by scientific authors as well, such as Wessel in 2009, where he defines agroecology as a practice, a science, and a movement, and he shows examples from different countries and how these countries put in practice this concept. And in some countries, for instance, in Europe, the scientific side is stronger. But in Brazil, for instance, agroecology was born and strengthened by the social movements. I'm not saying that the social movements are doing science. And indeed, if you go to the terminology, agroecology, the ology, it means that is the study of something. So if you go to that sense, then I think, yeah, I have to agree with this. But for different people, it can have also more broad meanings. And I think that we can learn with each other. So science can learn with social movements, and social movements can also learn with science, because we do science to be applied on the fields and on reality. So we need also to consider what are the local needs, and also we need people organized many times to fight for policies or to try to develop extension services that are more appropriated. And I think science can help with that, identifying specific management strategies that are efficient, or the results and the outcomes of a certain policy that was implemented. So that's where I see the intersection.
Okay. Building a little bit on that theme, the title of your thesis, I think, is nicely projected, so we don't need to read it out. It has the two important verbs in it. One is linking, that is linking biodiversity, ecosystem services, and social actors. And the other one is promoting agroecological transition. And when you set out to do this PhD thesis, what was your base motivation? Was it to link, or was it to promote?
Yeah, I think my primary objective was to promote more sustainable systems. So actually in the beginning, the title of my thesis was to promote or to inform the design of more sustainable systems. So I started with this. So that was my main goal. So how do we promote sustainable systems? I started with that question. So how do we do this? And then in my research, I tried to explore the links between biodiversity, because I think biodiversity is a crucial component for the sustainability of systems. And ecosystem services approach is a nice conceptual framework, because it allows us to go beyond only crop productivity or agronomic issues, but it really shows the multiple benefits that can be derived from agriculture and from natural areas as well. So then
Sorry if I can interrupt you.
Yes, sure.
From what you're saying, would you title then nothing better to let it be linking blah, 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 to promote sustainability?
Yes. But then I was going to come to that point, because then I was developing then the research. I identified biodiversity and ecosystem services as a very important issues, and actually social actors was not there in the beginning as well. So in the end, I realized how important it was to also put that in the title, as people were really part of my research, and their needs and their knowledge and their perceptions. And then after, I also realized that the sustainable systems I was talking about were agroecological systems, because that's the kind of system that I believe...
But in your thesis, you're trying to analyze the pros and cons of agroecological systems as opposed to other systems. How can you promote something when you have not yet found out whether it's better or worse?
Mm-hmm.
How can you then promote something that you don't even know yet whether it's better or worse?
Yes. Yeah, I think this is something that, for instance, I discussed that in my first paper, and actually the reviewers asked me to take a stand on what kind of theoretical framework I would use as agroecology as a normative goal, or as something that we don't know if it's good or bad. So based on my experience and based on the literature review that I did in Zona da Mata, we saw that the kind of sustainable agriculture that was working on the ground and that farmers were adopting was agroecology. So what I wanted to see if this is and how to enhance this process, because it's not an end point. It doesn't mean that they are agroecological and that's fine and they are perfect, because it's a process, so it's a transition. So we need to try to foster that and understand what are the bottlenecks and how we can try to help farmers to improve and become more agroecological and so on.
Okay. I think I have a little bit of time for a short question, and for that I would like you to instruct one of your panelists to read out proposition 4.
Quantification of the economic value of nature overlooks the fact that a person dying of thirst, a glass of water is priceless. So again, quantification of the economic value of nature overlooks the fact that for a person dying of thirst, a glass of water is priceless.
Thank you.
Thank you, and we even heard it twice, so now I think we're quite clear on it. What this refers to is that I think what you're trying to say is ecosystem services are often not paid for. They're priced, they're so valuable, but yet no one pays for them. And this raises a question that I sometimes ask, like who pays for the rain? And should we pay for the rain?
No, I don't think so. No, I think what I want to also express here is that many times if you put an economic value, that can maybe help us to value more the natural resources or to see how important they are. But I think it's a limited approach to only put an economic value. There are other ways to value things. And I think if you put an economic value, that can be weak many times. For instance, in this example of water, we all drink water and we can put a price on it, but in 10 years, if water ends and nobody has water to drink anymore, it doesn't matter if you have $1 million to pay for water. If it's no water, you're going to die anyway. So it doesn't matter that you put a price in the beginning, because after 10 years, if this resource is over, you're just going to die, although you can have a lot of money to pay for it. So that's the idea.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ante. The opposition will now be continued by the second opponent, Dr. Fernandes, who is Associate Professor at the Universidade Federal de Viçosa in Brazil. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Mr. Rector. Thank you to Wageningen University for this invitation and the opportunity and pleasure to read this interesting thesis. My first question is about the farm's perception on ecosystem services. This perception is an individually constructed process, or is the product or the result of the engagement of these farms on the agroecological movement?
Yeah, I think it's the result of the engagement. As we can see, I defined the different farm types, and I wanted to see if there was differences in perceptions, and what I found out is that there are differences. And I think that in the case of agroecological farmers, these differences are based on a process of knowledge building that is derived from the agroecological transition processes, where farmers could discuss.
In this case, to support and to foster the agroecological movement, it's enough, it's sufficient and effective to improve the agroecological systems like you studied there?
Sorry, can you repeat, please?
Just to support and to foster the agroecological movement is effective and efficient to maybe to increase the ecological services in these farms?
Yeah, I think there are different ways to promote, and I think agroecology is one of them. I wouldn't say that is the only one. Maybe I think there are other ways as well to try to promote sustainability. But in the case of Zona da Mata, I think that's the way that has been done. And yeah.
Okay. When you study the soil-based ecosystem service on pasture and cough system, you use just one soil physics parameters, the soil clay content. Yeah. Do you think that using just one soil physics variable maybe can be considered a limitation of your study? And why do you use soil clay content?
Yeah. So, highly esteemed opponent, thank you for this question. Yeah, I think indeed is a limitation because some services related to water mainly can be more better assessed with physical indicators. And in the case of pastures, in my chapter 4, you can see that you cannot detect so many differences. And maybe one of the reasons is because we didn't use physical indicators. That can be very important, but due to limitations of time and resources, I could not do it. And I acknowledge this, and I think it would be an interesting point to look in future studies.
But why to use the soil clay? Because we do not expect variation in this variable when you use or management the soil.
Yeah.
Do you understand my question?
Yes, I do. Yes, I use it because also as a way to try to see, because soil clay can indicate the natural conditions of the soil. So I used it at first place to try to see if they had similar also clay content, and I think that was something that I wanted to see, because if it's more or less similar, then you can better assess the effects of management. So that was the main reason why I measured it.
But do you agree that this variable is not maybe so good to comparison treatment?
Yeah.
Another variable that you use is the water retaining in soil leaf litter. Yeah?
Yeah.
This is a new proposition from your thesis? Because did you see this use of this variable before?
No. Actually, I did. Yeah, I did see, but maybe I have seen this methodology that I used with the quadrants to collect leaf litter, and this is commonly used. So I decided also to measure the water content, because that's very important, the litter is capturing, but I don't, from the top of my head, I don't remember a study that did exactly like this, but the methodology, yes, but not the indicator per se. And that was indeed a difficult thing. So I had to think a lot in order to not get biased, because, of course, the water content can vary a lot depending on the day that you collect.
Yes.
But then what I did is that I waited for a heavy rain. So where we expect that the soil and the litter can absorb water and hold water. So I waited for this rain, and after a certain number of days, I collected all the sample in the same day after the heavy rain. So that was my parameter to try to control for variations.
Then is a new proposition.
Yeah.
Okay. In the chapter 2, you comment about, you evaluate the recognition of human work importance as one variable in the number of agroecological practices and principles.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
How do you evaluate this recognition?
Yeah. So this was based, we had a survey, and also we had different methods that we used in the field that are based on participatory rural appraisals. So we did that based on observations and interview with farmers.
But you asked all the family, just the head of the farmer, maybe the husband?
Yeah, we tried always to do it in a family setting. So at least with the man and the woman, and if possible, also the youth.
And the answer is yes or not? Just this.
Yeah, then
Possible.
Yeah, in the field I was observing also, and then I would ask them to confirm, and then I could make a checklist of what was present and what was not present. So indeed, it doesn't measure the intensity of use of these practices, but just if it's present or absent.
You organized 3 workshops to build the participatory farming typology, no? And in the final, you set 6 farms types.
Yeah,
I think so. In these workshops, you have representatives from all these 6 final types. Yeah.
No, in the workshops, large-scale farmers, they were not participating.
Then some farmers, maybe they define all the types.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because the workshops were developed mainly with family farmers, because they were more willing to participate in such activities. So I tried to invite also large-scale farmers, but yeah, they didn't come. And also we did, to this workshop, we tried to reach as much farmers as possible, and we did that through organizations such as farmers' unions. And most of the farmers that are part of the farmers' unions are family farmers. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rector.
Thank you, Dr. Fernandez. The opposition will now be continued by the third opponent, Dr. Verwij, who is Associate Professor at the Copernicus Institute of Sustainable Development in Utrecht. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Rector. Respected candidate, I also read your dissertation with much interest, and the pleasant writing style, clear explanations made it even more of a pleasure to read your book. My first question relates to chapter 4. In one of the previous chapters, chapter 2, you construct a farm typology based on a group of 115 farms. However, in chapter 4, you zoom in on a much smaller group of farms, 12 altogether. However, I failed to read in your dissertation what were the selection criteria for those 12 farms concerning biophysical variables. Could you elaborate on that?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. Yeah, this was a big challenge for me because in the second chapter, it was more about farmers' knowledge, so I could choose any farmer could participate. But in chapter 4, I had a big limitation because I was measuring soil functions and soil properties, so I needed to control for that. So I was looking for fields that were only fields that were in the convex part of the landscape, because in Zona da Mata is very hilly, so we have the concave parts, the convex parts, and the flat areas in the top of the hills. But what is predominant in the landscape is the convex part. So I was always looking for fields that were on that condition, and the selection criteria was this, and also if the farmer belonged or not to a certain farm type, because I had 3 different farm types, so they had to fit in these different farm types.
And that becomes clear from chapter 2, of course.
Yes.
The colorful cover of your book already shows that there is a lot of biophysical variation in your landscape.
Yes.
However, you did not take those biophysical variables into account in your analysis when it comes to slope, for instance, or altitude. And if I then read in chapter 2 that the distances between farms can be quite big, yes, up to 60, 70 kilometers, and that the altitudinal range is from 200 to 1800 meters, why didn't you integrate that type of information in your analysis?
Yes. Yeah, I did not do this because I thought, for me the most important thing to control was the type of soil. So it had to be oxy soil and in the convex part. So it was always in a hilly area. It was never flat, so it was always with certain slope. Of course, some fields had larger slopes than others.
And what about the altitudinal range then?
Yeah. So the altitudinal range is something that I did not take into account, and I think it can have an effect on soil properties, for instance. But yeah, in the end, I did not consider it because also in this kind of work where we assess realistic management scenarios, it's very difficult sometimes to control for everything. But
can you say something about the altitudinal range?
Yeah.
For instance, when we did research on coffee agroforestry in Peru, we found that the altitudinal gradient played a very important role. Mm-hmm. And farmers practicing agroforestry were found more upwards in the study area than the more intensively managed coffee systems. How about your study area?
Yeah. Well, in my case, this was not not the case because I had they were randomly distributed. The different farms they were randomly distributed. So I had agroecological farms that were upper in the landscape, some that were lower, and the same goes for large-scale farms and so on. So I had.
And what could be the difference in altitude then between the upper and the lower farmers?
Yeah, I think it can go maybe. I think the lowest is around 750 or 800, something like this, and it goes until 1,000 meters, 1,100, something like this.
Okay. So the altitudinal range is not that big in comparison to Chapter 2?
No. And also because, also coffee is mainly produced above 600 meters. So, yeah, it was not that big.
Okay. Then in relation to management practices, there is also a very wide variety of different agroecological management practices involved, right? And some farmers practice very incremental steps when it comes to agroecological measures, whereas others have true agroforestry systems. So why didn't you choose to have more homogeneity in your data sets according to management type? And for instance, why didn't you incorporate a subset of true agroforestry systems?
Yeah, so in chapter 4, all the agroecological farms that I worked, they had trees in the coffee and in the pastures, so they were considered at a certain degree agroforestry systems. So that was for me also, yeah, it's kind of homogeneous set because of this. And I tried to identify the main practices that were common to all farmers to be able to better compare and put this in my analysis. So some farmers, for instance, they were doing pruning in their trees, and that is not in my analysis. But that was very difficult to incorporate because just one or two farmers would do this. So, yeah, that can be a limitation, but yeah.
And an important tree species is Inga, which is very common in Latin American coffee agroforestry, right?
Yes.
What are important tree products that people derive from the tree component in their coffee systems?
Yes. That depends a lot also. So that is another thing that it would be interesting to explore more. But as it had so much variation, I decided to not assess that specifically. But for instance, many farmers, they use the wood that they prune for their own use. Because in Minas Gerais, in my study area, it's very common to have wooden stoves and ovens, so they need a lot of wood to feed this. So the agroforestry systems can be a way to avoid that they take trees from the forest, for instance. They can have it on their agricultural fields, but also fruits. Many of them produce fruits and sell fruits even, such as banana and avocado. So this is also can be considered as a product. And some of them also make medicinal products out of the bark of the leaves or of the trees, and also the leaves of the trees. So this can also be considered as a product, and some of them even start commercializing that, but in a very small degree, a very incipient degree. So this is something to try to develop, and one of the constraints, for instance, in terms of fruit products, is the market, because
of course.
Yeah.
To what extent are farmers' choices regarding the tree component influenced by a perception of climate change? Do you have any idea?
I think this concept of climate change, maybe with that term, is not so well known by farmers, or they don't speak so much about climate change per se, but they do. For instance, we had a big drought in 3 years ago in our region, and that is perceived by farmers as a climate change, although they don't call it like this. So then they try to I think that had a big impact in their perception also, and in the way they manage their systems. And I think they don't select a specific tree because they are good to a specific tree species because they are good to hold water, for instance, or to control that. But I think they have the perception that in general trees are good for holding water, avoiding soil erosion, and so on.
My final question relates to scaling up of agroecological transitions. And this upscaling can be hampered by lock-in the industrial model of agriculture. Mm-hmm. Now, after having written your dissertation, what are your most important ideas how this lock-in could be addressed? And what could, for instance, be the role of certification?
Yes. I think one of the biggest issues for this lock-in, there are many that come to my mind, so I'll try to mention a few of them. So for instance, education, I think it's really a basis because many times children in the schools, they learn that farming is an efficient way of family farming, is an efficient way of producing food, is for poor people, and it's something from the past, and so on. So I think we need to, this is very important because otherwise the youth, they feel, they fall into this lock-in because they already want to go to the city because what their parents are doing is not, doesn't have a future. So I think it's very important to work with education. And for instance, the agrarian schools that we have, the family agrarian schools that we have, they are a positive point in that sense because they try to give the opportunity of young people to think and make their own decisions, not based on the hegemonic model that is trying to push them towards something. So this is one thing. And I will go to certification that you mentioned specifically. I think this can also be something that can benefit farmers a lot because they can give value to their products, and then the neighbors see that you are doing good, that you can sell your product and for a good price, and that can help to develop the mindset that breaks this lock-in that we are talking about. So
you think that the price difference matters? Would that be the primary benefit of certification?
No, I wouldn't say it's the primary benefit, but just the recognition that what they're doing is a nice work and is something that should be recognized and valued. So for instance, we had this payment for ecosystem services program in our state, and it was to pay for farmers that had forest area in their farms. And it was little money. It was like 100 reais per year per hectare of forest. But farmers, the family farmers, they wanted to participate just to get the recognition, not so much for the money, but just because this would show that they are doing a nice work and that they're protecting nature, and maybe this can help other farmers to see the benefits of doing so.
Based on our research at Utrecht University, we have the impression that technical assistance matters. And that could be a very positive role of certification.
Yes.
What do you think about that?
Yes, I also think that. I think that can be very important. And in Brazil, we have a certification process that is a participatory certification process. So technicians also participate, but they don't give the final, like the group decides who is certified and why. So that is very nice, and this certification is based on knowledge exchanges as well. So all farmers and all technicians, they go to a certain farm and they discuss about technical problems and possible solutions, and I think that can be very beneficial as a more bottom-up technical approach to reach farmers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Verwij. The opposition will now be continued by the fourth opponent, Dr. Alma Kinders, who is Associate Professor at the Knowledge, Technology and Innovation Group at Wageningen University. The floor is yours.
Respected candidate, I also read your thesis with interest, and like it's normal, you start at the beginning. So it was only at the end that I read the part where you reflect on action research, and you say that engaging with different disciplines and farmers requires effort that is not always valued and recognized by the academic system. I greatly support that observation, and it's certainly an aspect of your work that I sympathize with. So maybe it's good that I only read it at the end, because too much sympathy could have affected my critical lens that I need to have as an examiner of your work. Yes. But so luckily I had my critical lens before that. And I want to start with action research, which you give the name participatory action research, which I find a bit strange, because action research should always be participatory in my view. But that's not my question. You do not specifically define participatory action research in your thesis, unless I overlooked it. But you write, and that's a proper practice in action research, you negotiated your research question with the farmers. It's in the end that you write, during the workshops, this is on page 216, we presented a general outline of the Forefront program using participatory approaches. The participants, the farmers, were encouraged to suggest problems or ideas that research could help to address. So these problems were gathered and clustered, and then our group of PhD candidates reflected on how we could link and shape our research questions to tackle the issues pointed out by farmers. What I miss in your thesis is what were the questions of these farmers? And also, were eventually, in the end, the questions of the farmers answered? And have, in the end, the farmers also benefited from having participated in this research? Have the outcome somehow helped them to improve their situation, add to their knowledge? Because for me, that's also a part of the action research, right? Yes. Okay, so there we share the same definition. So could you tell me a little bit more about the research questions of the farmers and whether these were answered?
So, highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. I think that is a very, very interesting topic. And what happened in my research is that I had the different chapters that are presented in the thesis, but to develop these chapters, we had a whole background of activities and of actions that we took that are not completely thoroughly explained in the thesis, because also it was a collective process. So I also did it together with my colleagues that were part of the same program as I, the Forefront program. So I think this kind of program can be very helpful to help researchers to join efforts and build collectively a participatory action research process. And as you mentioned, we defined the research questions with farmers, and that was very good because they would feel motivated to work with us because they knew that their questions were being somehow taken in consideration. And since the beginning, we stressed to farmers that we don't have a magic wand that will just solve their problems, because unfortunately we cannot do this as researchers. I think it's very ambitious to say that we can just solve their problems. So we had another approach that we would try to engage with them in their needs and in their issues, and try to help them and work together with them. So I think this is the approach that we took, and I think that's very important. Otherwise we can create false expectations from farmers that we simply cannot reach. And I think that we managed to answer some of the questions and some of their issues, and we organized a series of workshops during the research to try to give back these results and discuss this with them, and they were very happy about this, and they were very happy to think about their systems and to try to implement solutions. So I can give a few examples. So for instance...
What?
Yes, short. So just a very short one. One of the farmers stopped using pesticides, for instance, after our research, and they recognized, they were very happy that we were doing these workshops during the research and always in contact with them. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe later I'll have time to ask you about what the questions were that they had in the beginning.
Yeah.
Could one of your paranims please read proposition number 5?
Cultural and social diversity enhances biodiversity and human well-being.
I actually reflected upon that proposition in relation to your proposition number 4, where you write a lot about quantifications and some things not being able to be quantified or give false numbers whatsoever. And here it's about well-being. You say the social and cultural diversity adds to the well-being. Given that you're such a believer of agroecology, I assume that you also take it that agroecological lifestyle or farming will contribute to the well-being of the farmers, right? How do you know?
Yeah, as a scientist, I think that is difficult to answer because we did not measure their well-being. So this is something I unfortunately cannot properly answer with a more scientific perspective, but it's something would be interesting to look at, how their human well-being is being affected. But I can see that I do think that with my perception, just with my knowledge in the field works and so on, I do see differences, and also collecting my own data, I also see difference.
In well-being of the farmers?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm from the qualitative social sciences in that sense, and I would be happy with any other way that you can say something about the improved well-being of the farmers. So if you would talk to them, that would also be fine.
Yep.
Right? But I wonder, did you talk about that aspect of agroecology? I mean, you are the promoter of agroecology. You're seeking to advance agroecological practices and whatsoever. But what are the views of the farmers that you worked with? Mm-hmm. You worked, for example, in these workshops, if I remember well, 72 farmers, right? A couple of workshops. Did they all share your view? And who were those farmers? Were they the heads of the household, the male heads of the household? And what about these other household members? So I'm wondering about the diversity among the farmers and maybe in relation to their household members, whether they all share the view and they all want to advance this agroecological farming and lifestyle and organization.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the workshops in chapter 2, I think farmers, they all were concerned with problems brought by the current mode of agriculture, the predominant mode. So, for instance, I think pesticides, it's something that directly affects their human well-being, and I think they do all agree on that, especially family farmers. And that is reflected in their perceptions in chapter 3, as both conventional and agroecological family farmers, they see the negative impacts of pesticides.
For the sake of time, I'm going to interrupt you because
Yeah.
I'm really curious then about another aspect. You made these fuzzy maps to kind of understand the perceptions of the farmers of why they are farming the way they're farming, kind of. But these fuzzy, these perceptions, these maps that you get are like snapshots on how they now think, right? They don't say where they are coming from or where they would want to go to. And if you are thinking about transition and you're telling me that farmers maybe would want to change their practices, I don't understand why you have just mapped categories and you have not explored how farmers would want to change or what keeps them from changing. Could you please spend the last couple of minutes on that?
Yes. Well, I think this is a very important aspect to look at, and we discussed that, although this was not highlighted in my work. And yeah, I think it is important to see this time frame and how it develops. And sorry.
Well, I'm afraid there were not many minutes anymore. It was only half a minute. So thank you, Dr. Almakinders. I now adjourn the meeting. The examining committee will withdraw for consultation.
Just as a small announcement before the committee will come back, the reception, as was mentioned to you, will take place in Vreemde Streken. That is just down the road here on the right. And so after the committee has come back, I'd like to ask you to leave your great congratulations to Heitor until we are at Vreemde Streken. Thank you.
Please be seated. I hereby reopen this meeting. The academic boards of Universidade Federal de Viçosa and Wageningen University, represented by the Deputy Rector Magnificus and 7 committee members appointed by the academic boards, having noted the content of a thesis and resulting from a joint PhD program entitled Linking Biodiversity, Ecosystem Services and Social Actors to Promote Agroecological Transitions with Propositions, having heard the defense of that thesis, have decided to confer the degree of doctor on Heitor Mancini Teixeira, born in Juiz de Fora, Brazil, on February 18, 1990, and to grant him all rights and privileges ensuing from that doctorate by law and custom. The academic boards assume that you accept your duty as a scientist to execute your future research ethically and with due diligence according to the prevailing codes of conduct of both universities. I now invite the promoter, Professor Peña Claros, to acquit herself of her duty.
You have heard the decision of the Academic Board of Universidad Federal de Viçosa and Wageningen University to confer on you, Heitor Mancini Teixeira, the degree of doctor. It is now my honor to present you with the degree, signed by the Deputy Rector Magnificus, the promoters and the co-promoter, and sealed with the Great Seal of Wageningen University. I first invite you to sign the degree as well. With this signature, you declare to act according to the prevailing codes of conduct of both universities in the future. Please. Allow me, Mr. Rector Magnificus, to offer my congratulations and to add a personal address. Dear Dr. Teixeira, dear Dr. Heitor, congratulations with your newly acquired PhD title, also on behalf of Professor Irene Cardoso and Dr. Felix Bianchi. You are now a doctor graduated from both universities, Wageningen University and the Universidade Federal de Viçosa. Congratulations again. Eu também gostaria de parabenizar a Bruna e a teus pais aqui presentes, seu Esteban e Dona Lilian. Tenho certeza que vocês estão super orgulhosos dos logros que tem alcançado o Heitor. Parabéns para vocês também. We, your supervisors, are certainly very proud of you, your work and your achievements. Let me explain this in the coming minutes. You did your thesis within the framework of the Forefront program, an interdisciplinary research and education program being carried out in Brazil and Mexico. Forefront aims to design sustainable agroecosystems that will allow farmers to optimize the supply of ecosystem services in changing landscapes. Heitor, for your project, you aim to assess the relationship between farmers' perception, biodiversity, and ecosystem services to help making the transition towards more sustainable agroecosystems that are able to improve the quality of life of farmers and at the same time enhance the conservation of natural resources. Your project is interdisciplinary in scope as you combine many research fields, which is also represented in the opponents and in the discussion that we just had. This makes it also very challenging to summarize the key findings of your work in the few minutes I have available to do so. So let me just state some of your findings. You found that farmers differ in their management strategies, practices, and principles, and also on the perceptions regarding ecosystem services. But the perception is much more complex and interconnected than we previously assumed. You also found that management practices being used by farmers have an effect on biodiversity and on the provision of ecosystem services, and that the agroecological movement in Zona da Mata has also had an effect on the production system, all the production systems that they were aiming. So you see an effect also on pastures, still small, but you start seeing it. And this is because farmers are changing the way they manage the resources. You carry out action research as the farmers and other stakeholders were actively involved in your research, not only as the ones being interviewed, but as the ones shaping the questions, defining the approaches, and finding together the solutions. I fully agree with your third proposition. We need more action research. We need more solidarity research to answer most of our current questions if we want to make this world exist for some time. And with that, I conclude that we also need researchers like you. In your thesis, you have used a variety of methods. You are always eager to use the most recent advances for analyzing your data or to explore new research fields if those areas are promising to provide new insights. For example, you are now collaborating with researchers at NEO to understand the diversity of soil microorganisms and how this diversity relates to above-ground diversity, management practices, and the provision of ecosystem services. Yes, these are chapter 7 and probably chapter 8 of your thesis. But in the current version of your thesis, there are only 4 data chapters. 3 of them already published in scientific international journals, and 1 about to be submitted. This is impressive, Heitor, because even more when you consider that you had to take additional MSc level courses to compensate for the fact that you didn't have an MSc diploma when you started your PhD, and that you defended your thesis exactly within the 4 years. Your defense is today, your contract finishes today, and tomorrow you start a new adventure. You become a postdoc here at our university. I'm really looking forward to see what comes out of that. And now I would like, Mr. Rector, if you allow me, to give the word to Professor Cardoso for some personal notes.
Heitor arrived in the Netherlands for the first time in 2013 for 1-year internship supported by the Programa Ciências Sem Fronteiras launched by the former president of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff. His internship was with ILEA, the Center for Learning on Sustainable Agriculture, in partnership with Wageningen University. During his internship, he started, together with other students, the FEI, Farm Experience Internship, based on the Brazilian Student Experience, AVE, Estágio Interdisciplinar de Vivência, which started in 1988. Heitor went to Sweden to represent ILEA and at an international event. Because of his participation, 2 Brazilian farmers are exporting natural coffee for a very good price. Heitor is very smart and talented, but his success in developing a very nice action research, part of his thesis, is not only because of that. He had the opportunity to study in a very good schools, including the Federal University of Viçosa and Wageningen University. But this is only part of the history. He also comes from a very big family with a strong social commitment and artistic background. His grandmother now 102 years old, is mother of 17 children, one being his father. She still cares for people. Since he was a child, Heitor learned with his more than 1 cousins how to socialize and share things, including food, nature, and music. Several of his relatives are musicians and linked to capoeira, one of Heitor's passions. His father, Estevam, who is here, teaches music and plays flute. His mother, Lilian, who is also present, teaches French. As a consequence, Heitor is highly engaged with culture and nature, therefore with agroecology. At the university, Heitor was linked to the agroecological groups since the beginning, and also to CTA, the NGO that started agroecology in the Zona da Mata in 1987, with the collaboration of some members of his family. He actively participated in GAU, Mutirão Ciranda, and REGA, all organizations linked to the students' agroecological movement. Later, he met Bruna, one of his paranymphs, a very sweet woman who is involved also with the agroecological and capoeira movements. Soon, she is going to give the most precious gift to Heitor. People say that Heitor is a very lucky guy. However, according to Pasteur, fortune favors the prepared mind. Anyway, I wish you, Heitor, good luck, and I hope to see you as soon as possible back to Brazil, to work with agroecology and peasant, and to help us to clean up the mess that is happening there. I'm very proud of you. Parabéns.
Thank you, Professor Cardoso and Professor Peña Claros. Dear Dr. Teixeira, it is also my pleasure to be able to congratulate you with your just obtained title, Parabéns. And I would like to include your parents who are here, and of course your partner, Bruna, who is on stage, and also the people who are hopefully watching now on World TV from Brazil to look at this achievement that you just accomplished. I think they're all very proud of you. We actually just heard that. And so are we as university, and I hope I can also speak on behalf of the University of Viçosa, that we are very proud of your achievement. Thank you for choosing our universities for doing this research. When we had our pre-conversation for this day, it struck me that you were very committed to the topic that you have been studying, and it was also clear from the discussion today that you're also emotionally quite involved with this topic. So it's not a surprise then that you can continue on a similar topic now as a postdoc at Wageningen University. And so we are also very happy that we will continue to see you for a while. But we just heard that you're also very badly needed in Brazil. So at some point you probably will return. I wish you all the best for your new position now, together with Bruna, and the adventure you're going to have together. But also for the more distant future, when after finishing your postdoc you will no doubt continue to work on this topic, and we wish you all the best with that. I'd like to thank the committee for their time and effort spent on judging the thesis today, and especially, of course, Dr. Fernandez, who came all the way from Brazil, but also Dr. Verwij coming all the way from Utrecht, which is not that far. But I definitely would also not like to forget to thank Dr. Almekinders and Professor Ante for being here today. Your presence as committee members has been very important to make sure that we can keep up with the standards of our PhD thesis. So, thank you. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for being present here today to watch this graduation ceremony. and I think we can all be very proud of Dr. Teixeira. I wish you a very pleasant day, and with that, I close this session.